Nokhud Offensive returns as one of the dungeons for Mythic Plus in Season 4. The dungeon will start with a 40-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that window, you will upgrade your key. The dungeon provides the flexibility to choose which boss you want to tackle first. The standard route we'll be running is starting with Granyth. Here we cannot actually engage with the boss until we defeat 3 Nokhud Lance Masters. These mobs will have the most health in the pack, and tanks should face them away from your group due to their cleaving strikes, dealing physical damage in a wide arc from their melees. The Lance Master will also cast War Stomp. Your group must make sure to run out from under this to avoid being stunned and taking massive damage. Finally, they will cast Disruptive Shout, which must be interrupted at all costs. Failing to do so will interrupt spellcasting for 6 seconds and deal huge AoE damage to your group. Nokhud Planestompers boast these same abilities but under a different name. Nokhud Longbows are one of the few static mobs in here. They will shoot random targets for high physical damage. They will more notably cast Rain of Arrows, spawning multiple swirlies at each player's location, so make sure to avoid these. Nokhud War Spears will cast Pierce on the tank, leaving a stacking bleed effect for 12 seconds, so make sure to take out these mobs quickly. They will also charge the furthest player with Swift Stab, dealing high upfront damage and applying a lethal bleed for 8 seconds. Abilities like Vortex or Freezing Trap can counter the charge. If you're low on defensives here, make sure that you are not stood the furthest away. Nokhud Horn Sounders will cast Rally the Clan, increasing the physical damage of surrounding mobs by 50%, making them much harder to deal with. Make sure to stop this with stun or disruption effects to cancel this cast. Nokhud Beastmasters will begin a Hunt Prey cast. Make sure to stop this cast with stuns or hard CC, as it buffs their Rough-Hewn pet to start fixating a random party member, while increasing its damage by 150%. If this cast does go off, make sure to kite and CC the Ohn'iri to keep it away, otherwise it will quickly kill you, but do note that this buff can be soothed off. After killing all 3 Lance Masters, we can now take on Granyth. Upon reaching max energy, the boss will channel Eruption, dealing massive AoE nature damage repeatedly every 3 seconds, and subsequently increasing the damage of future shockwaves. The only way to stop this cast is by using the Dragon Killer Lancers around the encounter. Make sure to pre-assign somebody to use the Lancer ASAP. The boss will randomly activate one of the 3 Lancers a few seconds prior to the Eruption cast, and here a Nokhud Saboteur will be spawned that will charge towards the Lancer and attempt to dismantle it. Use CC while hard swapping to this ad to kill it before it reaches the Ballista, and now you're free to simply click the Lancer just before the Eruption to stun the boss for 5 seconds and remove 5% of its health. All players will need to make sure to run out from under the boss for his Tectonic Stomp. Failing to do so will knock you away and deal massive damage. And finally, healers will need to be ready for the Shards of Stone, dealing party-wide unavoidable nature damage. Once Granyth is defeated, mount up and dragon ride towards the second boss of the dungeon. Much like the first area, here we will need to break 4 Storm Surge totems to activate the Raging Tempest. These totems are accompanied by a named Stormcaller mob that will cast Totemic Overload, dealing unavoidable AoE damage to everybody around the totem, making the totem a high priority to kill. The Stormcallers will also cast Stormbolt randomly, so make sure to interrupt this. Primalist Storm Speakers are the most dangerous mob here. The top priority interrupt will be on their Tempest cast. Assign 1 player to sit on this cast as it deals lethal AoE damage to everyone. If it does end up going through, the 12-second dot it also applies can be dispelled. You must also make sure to kick their Summon Squall. This spawns a Squall that will also channel Tempest. Any spare kicks can go into the Storm Speaker's Storm Bolts. Primalist Thunderbeast will cast Chain Lightning on a random player. The targeted player must make sure to spread at least 10 yards away from all other players to avoid it bouncing. You'll also need to make sure to run out from its Thunderclap ability if you're in melee. This blasts players for big nature damage and reduces movement speed. Finally, you must interrupt their Thunderstrike ability. This deals massive nature damage to a random player. Primal Storm Shields will need to be purged whenever they cast Storm Shield. If this shield expires, it inflicts big AoE nature damage, so purge it or burst through it. Primalist Arc Blades will cast an Arcing Strike frontal towards the tank. A successful attack will deal big nature damage, but also deal 25% of the damage to a nearby player. After destroying the 4 totems, we can now face the Raging Tempest. This boss initially starts with 50 energy and will take around 30 seconds to enter its electrical storm phase. During this phase is where you'll need to commit personal defensives and healing cooldowns to live. Outside of this phase, the boss will recharge his energy before entering it again. Orbs of uncontrollable energy will travel towards the boss. Each time one is consumed, it will grant the player 5% damage and healing for 15 seconds, and this can stack. Note that you will take damage every time you consume one, so do so when you're safe. Periodically, he will afflict all players with Lightning Strike. Make sure that you're spread here so that you don't clip each other. but also know that it will cause an electrical overload, destroying any uncontrollable energy orbs within the circle and dealing massive damage to all players within 10 yards. Either collect them first or make sure not to cleave them. You'll probably want to use a defensive for this ability. Tanks will need to beware when the boss buffs itself with Energy Surge. This increases its melee attack speed by 100% for 8 seconds and deals extra nature damage on hit. Note that this can be magic dispelled. Tanks will also need to be wary when collecting orbs, as the boss will start to cast Wind Burst if nobody is in melee range. Finally, all players should make sure to stay out from under the boss to avoid dying to the Raging Tempest ability. Now it's time to fly to the third boss. Remember, you can fly into the tornadoes for a boost. Again, here we must kill 4 Soul Harvesters to activate Teera and Maruuk. These Soul Harvesters will cast Death Bolt Volley. Make sure to interrupt this at all costs. This cast deals massive shadow damage to all players within 30 yards. Be wary of their Shatter Soul cast. This will shatter 3 random players, making them deal 30% less damage until you collect your soul. Ukul Death Speakers are another high priority mob here. They will cast Chant of the Dead. Make sure that all players are stood at least 10 yards away from the mob here, or suffer lethal shadow damage. Your tank will also need to drag out the enemies from this cast too. Any undead enemies affected by the chant will gain 20% damage and damage reduction for 20 seconds. Beast Callers deal heavy tank damage due to its Sundering Slash, causing the tank to take 20% increased damage for 20 seconds. You'll also need to watch out for its Desecrating Roar, which will summon 5 backers to fight for it. Tanks make sure to pick up aggro. Corruptors will channel Necrotic Eruption, dealing massive shadow damage to anybody caught within 3 yards of the impact. They will also randomly cast Death Bolts. Interrupt these where possible, but they are definitely not a priority. Desecrated Ahunas are found in these packs, and there's also a patrol of them. They will cast Rotting Wind, which must be interrupted. This applies a party-wide lethal dot that will likely wipe you if it goes off. Risen Mystics will cast Swift Wind, buffing nearby allies' haste by 20%. Make sure to interrupt this to stop these packs from becoming even more deadly. Risen Warriors can also be found in the fields here. They'll cast a Mortal Strike on your tank, dealing huge upfront physical damage, but also reducing their healing received by 30% for 6 seconds. Tanks, this can get very scary. Now that we've defeated the 4 Soul Harvesters, we can engage Teera and Maruuk. These 2 bosses share health via lifelink. The best strategy here is to tank them together so that DPS can cleave them down, but also because once they are more than 15 yards apart from each other, they will increase their damage by 10% every 1 second. Tanks must make sure to deny them any stacks of this buff throughout the fight. Upon reaching 100 energy, both bosses will cast their signature ability. Teera will target every player with Gale Arrow, dealing big upfront damage to players and spawning 4 tornadoes that drift out from the point of impact, dealing more nature damage and knocking back players if struck. The best strat to deal with this is to stack up so the tornadoes group up nicely, but you must make sure to use a defensive. Maruuk will cast Earth Splitter upon reaching 100 energy. This must be dodged at all costs. After 2 seconds, the marked ground will erupt, so make sure to sidestep it. Apart from these abilities, Teera will Spirit Leap to a random location to quickly move to her to continue cleaving them down. She will also cast Quick Shot at a random player. Make sure you are at least above half health to prevent any lethal damage. Maruuk will cast Brutalize on the tank, dealing incredibly strong physical damage, so you must make sure to have active mitigation up for this. He will also occasionally cast Frightful Roar. All players must make sure to run out from this or you'll suffer huge shadow damage and get feared for 5 seconds. Teera's final ability is Repel. This will push the whole party back from her and she'll follow up with Guardian Wind. Range classes should be ready to kick this ability ASAP. You can actually round up to 93.88% enemy forces count before flying in the back entrance so you can skip the last mobs here. Before the last boss, there are 2 mini bosses you'll need to kill around the same time due to their Raging Kin buff. This increases their physical damage and casting speed massively when their sibling dies. Balakar will throw a Ravaging Spear that you must dodge, and you'll also need to dodge his Vehement Charge. Failing to do so will inflict massive damage and knock you back. Batak will cast a Frontal Broad Stomp, so tanks should make sure to face it away at all times. He'll also cast a Blood-Curdling Shout that must be interrupted, otherwise again you'll suffer massive shadow damage and be feared. Finally, we can take on the last boss, Balakar Khan. In the first phase of this fight, he will cast Iron Spear on a random target, followed by an immediate Iron Stampede charge to retrieve his spear. Make sure to avoid the charge, and you can bait this into a wall to shorten the distance he travels to maintain uptime. You also must dodge his Upheaval. Tanks will need to deal with the boss's Rending Strike. This leaves a very nasty bleed effect and increases damage taken from Savage Strike by 500%. You must use mitigation to live this tank buster. Upon reaching the intermission, Balakar will become immune and spawn 4 Stormcasters. kick these mobs and quickly nuke them down while CCing them, or you can easily be one-shot. You'll also need to dodge the lightning on the ground here and for the rest of the fight. During this phase is a great time to use personal defensives. Once phase 2 starts, the fight becomes a lot harder. Khan will now cast Static Spear at a random player, dealing massive nature damage, and upon impact will pull in all party members to the location. Again, all players must run out before the boss charges with his Iron Stampede. In this last phase, Upheaval will turn into Crackling Upheaval, which deals nature damage, and it also leaves a lingering pool of Quake on the ground that you need to stay away from. Healers will need to dispel the magic effect from Conductive Strike, which has now replaced Rending Strike. This now deals upfront nature damage as well as Thunder Strike. But that's it for this encounter, and that wraps up Nokhud Offensive and Mythic Plus. If this guide did help you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and subscribe to your boy. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.